Good evening again. I'm just going to finish off the story about the Borders Rugby and Scottish Rugby and the links to interlocking director. His name is Julian Lamont. Could be John Lamont, could be a different person. Very difficult to tell because of the capacity to cheat and steal in the British business records, the stock market, the corporations and the law sector that John Lamont MSP is an advisor on. I mentioned briefly the missed kick and the selling off of London Scottish in the 1960s. I failed to mention one of the themes that I've been very keen on, and one of the London Scottish players who I played against, he was immensely strong. He also got embroiled in the financial services sector, like Gavi Hastings here, who conveniently missed a kick right in front of the posts to let England get into the World Cup final the year that they were beaten narrowly by Australia at Twickenham. Yeah, the whole thing is a stitch up, as we've portrayed for the Football World Cup. When the politicians around the globe are exposed, then these bastards panic. They get a little bung to desert their country, and they will miss a kick, or they will close down on one of the clubs in one of the premier feeders for Scottish rugby in the London area, London Scottish, as we mentioned this morning, sold off to Bristol Rugby Club. And you know all about the connections of Bristol and Liverpool and Birmingham to the New World Order and their enslavement to steal from the people and to deceive them. Scotland is no better. What we're doing now is swapping players and coaches around to cover the shame of the asset stripping of a once great game. Let me just show you Andy Irvine, who was selected to be the boss or the leader of the delegation that went into Australia last year with the British Lions. The British Lions had a news website, and I posted all of the information on the corruption between 2011 and 2012 to the British Lions news agency. None of it got actioned. All of it was ignored. All of the people, and we've talked about Michael Lynagh and his cardiovascular accident, and the person who now presents the Sky News does not look at all like the old Michael Lynagh, and he makes rarer and rarer appearances now. Michael Lynagh is a globalised rugby thief. He used to play for Australia when they beat England in the World Cup final, where Hastings missed the kick in the semi-final. He played for Saracens in London, who have occupied the Stocks House that is now occupied by one of my previous employers, who I also got the sack from, who is the boss at Butlins. His name is Harris, but he's not Rolf, and he's relatively decent, although he gets very angry when people who have fished for 30 years give him advice on how to run fish. But that is a very, very minor sin in any sector, and everybody has a temper, and quite often it is quite helpful to get rid of corruption and evil human behaviours if you react aggressively against it. This is what Andy Irvine has registered in his... Andy Irvine was a childhood hero of mine. My Auntie Mary told me that he was going to be one of the world greats, and our Kelso hero, George Fairbairn, who ended up in the rugby league world as a world hero, was displaced from rugby union by Andrew Irvine because he was the incumbent of the full-back position in the rugby pitch. The reason he's now in favour with the administrators in the game is because he's become a magnet in the financial services sector. He's registered at he's registered at Throgmorton Avenue, London, United Kingdom, EC2 2DL. Shop name Andrew Irvine, year of birth 1951. There's the cash values. The longest current appointment spans 22 years and 7 months at Montanaro European Smaller Companies Trust plc. The combined cash at bank value for all businesses where Andrew holds a current appointment equals £40,670, with a combined asset value of 340 million and liabilities of 309 million. Roles within Andrew Irvine within the recorded businesses include director. So this is a dyed-in-the-wool Scotsman. Used to play rugby for, I believe, Heriots RFC, and my teeth in my very articulate mouth are all over the Heriots pitch, because I was quite loud even in the days when I played up there. And I miss them a lot because the prosthetic device in my frequently deployed mouth is now beginning to wobble around. So I've talked to dentists who have come in from Poland and are my neighbours now, and they may be able to fix it for me. They're very, very decent people. All of the people who've been sent around me to monitor me are very, very decent, and they have the potential for world greatness now, because I'm beginning to influence people and persuade people that the way to run the world is honestly and decently, and all of my neighbours are beginning to see the benefits of doing things that way. Right, let's have a wee scan at where were we when we left off. So we'll come back to rugby as we find it in the listings, but Andrew Irvine's listings on the business directory include the Edinburgh City Centre Management Company Limited, Stoss plc, Ivory and Syme Income Trust plc, Optimum Cash Co Limited, South Shore Developments Limited, First Optimum plc, the Clydesdale Investment Trust Public Limited Company. Now the Clydesdale word in financial services now has become very wobbly. There have been a lot of corporate crashes in the banking world, as you know, and Scotland is not immune in that sector. Scottish Sports Aid Foundation Limited, Robertson Property Limited. Now every time we get a Robertson, we find that they have major holdings, and Andy Irvine's middle name is Robertson. Trustco Finance plc, the Bill McLaren Foundation. You remember the statue of Bill McLaren in the woods with the dead men's boots and the war graves? The politicians still get the statues in the high street. Mesked Securities Limited, Scottish Radio Holdings Limited. Now that is a propaganda event. I listen to it frequently. They are now demonising Islam so that the profiteers in financial services can profit all over Scotland in the Israeli banks, and potentially it will take young children who are currently playing mini rugby or schoolboy rugby to their deaths on distant continents. Every decade or so those crimes get repeated in different places in the peace-loving world. All of my correspondence on all of those themes was completely ignored by the British Lions News Agency. Fidelity Special Values, Radio Forth Limited, Scottish Rugby Union plc. Now it's quite stunning if you visit the Scottish Rugby Union webpage that they make directors of the people that actually play the game. And I don't know what the cover up there is, but when you see what happened when they rebuilt Murrayfield, instead of Murrayfield being owned by Scottish rugby fanatics, they only released a few thousand debentures, and a tiny number of people were able to invest in that. They could have sold the nation's rugby to the nation's supporters, but that would be too decent and long-termist. What you have to do is build up a debt burden, and all of the chief executives now have been appointed so that that debt burden accelerates into the red really quickly. And all of them are Freemasons, like the coaches from distant lands. It's a bloody long time since Scotland had an indigenous coach of its own. They're Australians. We've not yet blessedly had a Frenchman who can barely speak the language, or an Italian like the football manager at England, who's now in charge of the Russian soccer team. His linguistics are non-existent, but he earned £8 million a year as the coach and chief coach at the English Football Association before he was taken over by Woy with the Wisp from Norway. Woy is a globalist coach, and he has a good perspective, and England are really lucky that England are allowed to have English coaches and are still allowed to qualify for the finals of the major tournaments. Now Scotland's big soccer internationals are hosted at Wembley, and the fans have to spend a fortune getting up and down on the trains that are still owned by Richard Branson in the tax havens. Jones Lang LaSalle, oh, that could be a French Freemasonic connection. Scotland Service Company. Let's just scan down to the bottom. So these are Andy Irvin's holdings. William Hunter's Old Men's Fund Nominees Limited, Chamber Developments Limited, Jones Lang LaSalle again, BlackRock. Remember the mention of Castle, well, I can't remember what it was, but what we talked about this morning was companies registered at the top end of the Royal Mile and the Royal label giving everything a toxic debt burden or a reputational problem. BlackRock North American Income Trust PLC. Can you see why Andy Irvin and the Saracens man from Australia, because of their interests and experience in financial services, are the obvious pick to go to the South Pacific and manipulate minds, as the other players, now fully professional and completely shameless, I'm led to believe that they earn £200,000 a year to be in contention for the wooden spoon every year. When Scotland was amateur and Irvin was decent, they were world beaters, but for the incapacity of Gavin Hastings to convert a penalty from right in front of the posts for his paymasters in England. He's the man that crashed London Scottish at great cost to the Scottish game. The one who lost his legs, his dad was in Colditz with the Batman. He's very near to the Merton estate, and my dad is a great admirer of theirs. And my dad has served in the forces as an ordinary working man on distant continents. The loyalty to the thieves and the traitors is massive, but God finds them out, and the amputations tell the absolute story. I forget the name of that guy. He was a flanker, immensely strong, and he's had, I think, both limbs, one limb amputated. Anyway, that's not on the topic that we were covering this morning, and I ran out of batteries on. What we were covering this morning was Julian Lamont. Julian Callum Lamont. Let's go back to that, and there are other mentions of rugby scandals further down on that, and the switching of players and coaches to cover up the directors that work for the dukes and duchesses that still run the feudal system in Britain. There's Michael Linus transcript. I've got documents. If anybody wants details of any of these things, I met one of the hardest standoffs that I've ever played with this morning. It was greatly feared. in the days when I played for the second team at Kelso, and that man has been the boss at Kelso Rugby Club. I've offered my services to speak to them at the annual dinner. All of my services have been openly available as a public speaker. Every speech I've made free of charge so far, because nobody wants to put themselves in danger of being taken out by the world's owners if somebody, even in a rugby dinner speech, gets too outspoken and honest about why the second team can no longer afford a bus to the Lothians. £500 to get from Kelso to the Lothians in a hired bus every weekend. Right, let's get on to the lists again of the interlocks to our friend Lamont. Okay, so this is where we left it off. There's Julian, Callum, Lamont. This is the third of 3 on Lamont's interlocks. Now Lamont is clearly a borderer, clearly a Scotsman. The majority of companies are very near to John Lamont MSP's Coldstream constituency, and let's keep going down until we see something else worthy of a highlight. So we're at Buccleuch Sporting Limited, quite relevant to the rugby issues. There's John Kerr, or Jock Kerr, maybe of Peebles, who's in charge of the litigation and access to accidental services in sport, or the arbitration groups that control that. There's some of the multi-named magnates and aristocrats right across the Scottish border. You've got all of the huge names mentioned in these listings. Anderson, Strathern, this time they've crashed only 168 of 200. There's Alan Forrest Nisbet. Now this could be my dental mate, but I very much doubt it from the birth date. His registered address is Cockylaw, Whittingham. Now if you're up to date with my interviews on fraud, you'll be aware of the Whittington joke. You know the stories about the Lord Mayor of London. When you drop the H, you get Whittington. It is a massive scam. They have trillions at the bank, and what they've got are anonymous directors who you cannot find pictures of, who are listed on Forbes without any pictures as multi-millionaires, and the name of one of them is Stephen Clarence Hancock's. The Clarence name, the man who's the angel who investigates the issue and proclaims that the decent person at the Building and Loan, the only way for him to be saved from suicide is for him to see the impact of having never lived. So what you've got now are fictitious directors named after Dick Whittington and Whittington, the Lord Mayor of London, and they are fictitious characters. It creates a massive money stream, and it's impossible to prove that because there is no regulation on identity fraud. It's easier to cross international borders with a passport. Sorry, it's easier to cheat on corporate frauds like this because there is no need to send in even a passport photo of the people that they claim are the person who has the birth year. There is a photo there under that, and that could be just an ad for something. Yeah, that's just an ad. Every grandad matters. That's not confirmation that this Alan Nisbet looks like that, and he is that age, and he is that gender. And we've explained the gender joke in the Navy culls, in the issues around the Rothschilds villages and renaming those villages, and the naming of people Hillary when they're male, and the hilarious the launch of the hilarious joke upon which Hillary is based. I'm getting a bit diverted, and that's why we're making 3 videos on a relatively simple set of interlocking directors. But this one takes me back into the academic world that I used to inhabit. Mr. James David Carnegie, now that is a huge name in Scottish finance and in anthropological initiatives. Andrew Carnegie funded the Kelso Library. Andrew Carnegie is a massive transatlantic funder and humanitarian, allegedly. He's got foundation trusts. They now send you the messages on the production of drones. And they are busted for cash. Arbuthnot is an ancient Scottish name. I know very well Gordon Arbuthnot. He's a professor of neuroscience. He's worked in New Zealand, in Dunedin, and he is very well funded now, but the places where he's had to go to get funding, which are explained by all of the videos that we make, he started in Edinburgh, up near the Kirk, up near the medical centres and the mosque. Yeah, it's in the same part of Edinburgh that the mosque is in. And I've visited the mosque. My website is all over the mosque. I've talked to academics that present on religious programmes on Radio 4. And Arbuthnot has had to go from Edinburgh as one of the world's most insightful neuroscientists. He's tooled up to study deeply interesting subjects in the brain, how one sensory hair connects to one nerve cell in the brain. It's amazingly refined. Arbuthnot for centuries has been a member of the Speculative Society of Edinburgh. That's the company, that's the secret society that helped to crash the banks in 2008, that scammed the Skye citizens of £80 million in tolls to cross the Skye Bridge, when the project to build the Skye Bridge cost £100,000. It's massive, and Robbie the Pict has still not responded to my plea for honest men in Scotland to come together and to contest the fraud. The neuroscience linkage is huge, and to my knowledge Professor Gordon Arbuthnot is still in Japan, where neuroscience is really well funded, and because of the crowding in Japan and the act of God in the form of the tsunami a couple of years ago, they are still trying to develop moon bases, that's bases in outer space, to overcome their crowding problem. World War II came up with another solution which is abhorrent, but crosses into the Trident project in Glasgow, very near Gordon Arbuthnot's patch in Edinburgh. It is scandalous that everything is done behind closed and locked doors. The media are not allowed to report what the world's tyrants do, but we have to report everything we do in academic audits, which are complete wastes of time, and the CPD system that has dismembered every decent sector of life in healthcare, in academia, and the audit for people that are working in trivia. It is the ruination of our society. Anyway, shit. Let's keep going down. Bagger. I don't think we've got very much to cover, because we've gotten through the majority of it. The dukes, duchesses, all the interlocks, all the busting of the pension funds, all the ponzi shelves, all of this is happening in the south of Scotland. And I'm led to believe that my school chum that we were speculating on this morning does not work anywhere near Selkirk or anywhere near the Bowhill estate where those Ponzi schemes and some of those scams are run from. Where did we get to? Country, we've got BQ Energy, and that's Miss Hyde Pennycook Science Park, so that's still on the science theme. We haven't got down that far. John Sale, Scotch beef. Oh, there's the other rugby one. So we're getting close to that. That will be of interest to most of the listeners, and it might get me some invitations to speak to ordinary working men that play rugby, which is still professional but relatively small fees, but the bus has become unaffordable. And when I played, there were no substitutes, as we mentioned this morning, but there were 5 teams. Everybody enjoyed the amateur ethic. Everybody had the cash to get pissed on a Saturday night, and if you were a student and totally funded by the state and your local council, you could get pissed on a Wednesday in the university team as well. Really good fun. My jotters and textbooks after my final exams are still circulating around in a bus in the Edinburgh region. And I do not miss them very much. The research that I now do is much more important for the free world than anything I did anywhere near the university or the pharmaceutical sectors. Right then, Caledon, Buccleuch Bioenergy, this is the cow farting in a bag and us selling it on. Through science parks and virtual products frauds. On the board of that, you have Mr. Neil Stephen McGuinness. That's the rugby prop that used to coach Kelso, that has been given the bums rush because everybody knows that I'm chasing Lamont down and that eventually I will find him. And I have found him. So McGuinness has been sacked by Kelso Rugby Club for inept performance. 3 years after they sacked the amateur coaches who give up their entire life for that club and are still doing it for nothing in their hometown. That is a blessedly productive system that I would recommend that they go back to. But no, as I said this morning, they have appointed people from Melrose and Berwick to coach the club, and that may well work out because those are the people that were decent enough to come and chat to me and make it plain that they were decent and were up for an open-ended chat. You get that from none of the politicians up to this point. Right then, the SRU, run by Princess Anne, have imposed Peter Wright. Peter Wright, you see him on the telly all the time, like that musician that used to play number 8 for Scotland. His son now plays number 8 for Scotland, but neither of them were all that good. And I'm just saying that to be a little bit contentious, so maybe they'll write to me and open up on the role, on the asset stripping of the game that they played as amateurs. But they are now Peter Wright and John Beattie, the number 8, who punches around with a guitar in his hand and makes money out of all sorts of alternative sectors, but is a rugby consultant and does the commentary on all the tedious matches that you get on a Friday night, and on the only things that the professional clubs or districts win now, which are the amateur tournaments at Melrose, which they're invited to because Melrose provide a lot of their players, and when they're invited to participate in that, either they or the visitors from Freemasonic France or from Saracens win the tournament, because they're all highly professional, they're all led by people that are highly professional, and the amateurs that do all of the coaching, all of the training, all of the mini rugby training on a Sunday morning, so no one can have any interest in religion, which is not necessarily a bad thing because of the other videos that we're making. They're working on their health, they're working on their fitness, and they're working on team play, which can only improve society. Okay, so Peter Wright is now the coach at Selkirk. That's the professional consultant that appears in apologetic commentaries on why Scotland win the wooden spoon every year, and all of their players get paid £200,000 to cover up the J. Robinson Wright. So John Robinson Wright is at the Arab UK Chambers of Commerce, and he has massive funds at the banks and in the other sectors that he works in. He's a director at the Borders College. The Borders College is registered as a charity in Dubai, where Michael Ellis Moore, the man who does not understand the brutalisation of ordinary working men and serfs at FLODDEN, 500 years after FLODDEN, he demonises Islam now, like the worshippers at the church in Ednam, who declare that Islam is the big threat to Britain. Yeah, I have shamed them for that. I have said to them that that is a very twisted statement to make after the sermon on Remembrance Sunday. And I met them this morning and they're still talking to me. It is good that they are still talking to me, because that's the only way that the world will get out of their predicament. So when we heard Michael Moore talking about the battle at Flodden and the massacre, where only 2 people returned to the Duke of Buccleuch's region of Selkirk, the troops that were coming down to support, or the menace, was coming from Boroughmuir, which is where Peter Wright played. And it is ever so twisted. And when I went to Jedburgh, where the Sheriff Court are at war with me, because I'm trying to reveal the illegitimacy of the English people that still tyrannise Scotland, then the Jedburgh people en masse in the bar refused to engage in any form of conversation, and the cost of a cup of instant coffee in a paper cup was £1. At the law courts, where I'm at war, it's only 60p, and I was very grateful to the genial staff, because they were prepared to speak to you about societal issues. As long as you've got access to Rupert Murdoch's sporting channels, the sheeples and the simple people who are being stolen from are happy to be tyrannised and slaughtered every now and again when they get conscripted as teenagers. Right then, we're very quickly now getting near the bottom of the list, and that will allow me to scan through. So this takes you to the German references. Wotherspoon. Now if I can find Wotherspoon on, so Robert John Wotherspoon has massive lists, and he's registered from Glenlyon to Germany in all sorts of sectors. If I can find him on that list on the right, it might be worthwhile, but let's go to that list on the right to exemplify exactly how these bigger criminals input to the massive web of trading and corruption that we're looking at here. I've highlighted that one because it's an interesting story about literature. We've talked about Jim Naughtie, Alistair Moffat, them writing books which are actually plagiarised on Scottish history, and Jim Naughtie not having the courage to release his book on the most influential people in Her Majesty's reign, because he knows that it is just propaganda and that I will pick it to pieces. Naughtie comes back to run the book festival in Melrose with the woman who professes that in the Icelandic bank crash, this is the woman that I used to have the hots for when my hormones were flowing. She presents the news, and her dad was an Orkney person, I've forgotten her name, but she came and gave a speech in the Cross Keys in Kelso, and the topic was urine. Now that may sound irrelevant, but because of the links to the taking the piss religious fraud for 2,000 years and the Piso authors of the New Testament, you know, and we've described already, the swimming hippos that only the inner circle who could speak Latin knew about up to 1913. I forget her name, Sally Magnuson. She's lovely, she's charming, she appears on University Challenge. She's just an ordinary decent person. She does not understand why she's had to go back to work because her pension fund was busted by the Icelandic banks. But if she would stop joking about the religious fraud that is a crime against all of the world's people, and take the news seriously and actually let the truth out, then everybody could have their pension funds back to fitness. Okay? Boydell is one of the most prestigious book companies in the world, like the Roxburgh Book Company. The Roxburgh Book Company is now owned by the joker that was the crossdresser who played Dame Edna Everage. That's why they trivialise everything in the book sector. And the Boydell joke is that the Boydell Elite Bookstore is a joke about Del Boy in the yellow van in the cheap shot frauds sector in the Finchley area in North London. That's Del Boy. The Del Boy comedy programme. You now understand porridge, you understand Del Boy and the yellow van, and trading second-hand goods and cheap shot scams in the semi-amateur sector. Anyway, let's keep going down because we're running out of batteries again, and I'm making videos with people that are taking video cameras into Scottish law courts and are confronting the judges on breaches of justice in Scotland. I'm talking to them at 9 o'clock. Unless the police storm into my home and bang me up. Buccleuch Scottish Beef Limited. No highlights. Could be, very likely. We are a very prominent agricultural region. It's blessedly productive. It produces hundreds of jobs, hundreds of thousands of jobs. We've got tenant farmers like the people that talk to me on the weekend about the merger of Berwick and Melrose into Kelso Rugby Club, and the new coaches who have been appointed, they work as tenant farmers. And it's blessedly productive, but right across our region, the nearest slaughterhouse is Shotts in Lanarkshire. It's 150 miles away, and it is chaos. It is a burden on the economy. When they run their little old-fashioned trading outlets in Kelso Square, which is a cobbled market square, they have to pay a significant fee to trade there by the corrupted local council. And what they do is that they have to send their stock to that distant place in the Central Belt, because the man with the clipboard has gone around all of the abattoirs. The Kelso abattoir closed when I was a boy. It was right next door to the blessedly productive railway station, and my trips to the coast in the Sunday school trips were on trains then. What has happened by design, and we have explained it in that Gonculator video, where everything that is capable is stripped out and rebuilt entirely for corporate profit or to launch a new set of merchandise. That we talked about the culling of the slaves and the invention of the tractor yesterday. It's still happening. So Beeching closed down all of the trains. We now have closed nearly all of the abattoirs in Scotland. The lamb comes from New Zealand, the milk comes from New Zealand, the Christmas turkey comes from Latin America. It's tragic, it's chaotic, and they've done it by design so that Princess Anne and the bastards that run the world and do the terror and the demonisation, they can have the world to themselves. And the world will starve to death within a fortnight if the globalised infrastructure is disturbed in another global war. We know now where to turn the guns. If you target the draft board and the men in pinstripe suits who never die for their country but get to lay the wreath at the cenotaph, then World War III will be over really, really quickly. Stephen House needs to be watched. Said Serio Limited. the Duke of Buccleuch, Richard W.J.M. Scott, John Sale, again agricultural activities, Mrs. Patricia Catherine Stewart Miller. Now the Millers are friends of my family, they're very decent people, played bowls with them, but the Miller name is closely associated with the religious fraud and the grinding of the bones to flour and the baker peace store jokes, and the Piso name is involved in everything that is in the false news, so that the religious fraud cannot be disclosed, even although we are now worshippers and we can see that the Catholic priesthood have been paedophiles for decades, and that even Archbishop O'Brien, who's a Knight of Malta and a friend of Jimmy Savile, to groom kids for the royals, none of them get any sort of law enforcement imposed on them. O'Brien's still alive, he's totally at liberty, and he lives right next door to the headmistress at Kelso High School, who, to my knowledge, on LinkedIn, we talked about Lamont on LinkedIn, she has no teaching experience. She's been planted to disrupt the system, like the previous head, who's a Burns Club fan and subscribes to enslaving his daughter in the survival of sub-Saharan Africa and particularly Malawi. And since my child went to Malawi, we've had the Ebola fundraising scandal imposed on us, just to divert the people from these massive cabals and their massive financial crimes. Buccleuch Heritage Brands, Jock Kerr again, links to West Sussex and same name as the Bond actor. Now what am I talking about there? That's Director, Association of Catering Butchers Limited, registered in West Sussex, and all of the names above it listed in the director listing are in the Scottish borders. Royal Smithfield Club, in brackets, the Penguin Properties Limited. Pennycook Science Park, Director Miss Zoe Georgina Hyde. Zoe Hyde holds one appointment at LTS International. The combined cash at bank value for all businesses are just £1 million, and that's in Pennycook, which I believe was a mining town on the outskirts of Edinburgh. But at least they're trying. They're trying to convert their science into productive products that the people can use to make their life better. Most of the fraud in the investment sector is in virtual products. Oil and gas in mines and plants that do not exist except for the glossy brochure, produced by the fraudulent companies like Ingenious Films LLP and those massive 600 directors, 600 overlapping ponzis run by Michael Grade and the ITN networks and the ITV frauds. Massive. Some of the proceeds there goes to Tel Aviv and to Israel. All of it is explained by Greg Hallett's life and him explaining that since 2012, when we changed the laws of succession to keep the crown corrupted, that the ownership of the world now transforms from America to Israel and Mossad and all of those laundering tools that Gordon Bowden and I have described. BQ Energy Number 2 Limited, goodness knows how many shelves they have. We've got one of those long lists of the dukedom's complicated ballot relations again. It looks like that has been a relatively lengthy, so it's from 1989 right through to 2004 they have served on that. Buccleuch Country Limited. So it looks as if we're going to end up with a little bit of a damp squib, because I can find nothing really sensational in this bottom section. And Julian, Callum, Lamont, James Austin Steele. Oh, we get back to Edward. Murray, Sir David Edward Murray. 145 current dissolved, 46 resigned, 191 in total. 191. Sarah Tahir, we talked about her in the Egyptian issues this morning. Chilco Limited. Okay, what we got here? Johnson has been in the news. This William Henry Johnson is registered in Bolton, pipe and tube supplier. Now that could be the reason. What we've talked about is the drugs running and the narcotics running into the South Pacific when the planes went missing in the South Pacific. All of that is a cover for the laundering crimes of Prince Philip and the triumvirate, who include Lord Plunket, Lord crikey, there are 3 of them. All of them are based in the south of England. All 3 of them have sired Queen Elizabeth's real babies. Prince Philip was kicked out of her bedroom after the 2nd year of their marriage because of his deviancy in that place. And all of that story is told by Greg Hallett. And the tubes that were sold or that were traded and sent down to the South Pacific and dropped into the ocean from Sunderland float planes, they were retrieved using sonar buoys, but the cocaine stash was in league with the Dutch monarchies. The cocaine was stored in Philips light tubes. That's the Philips electricity company run by the Dutch monarchs, and it is ruthless. And the whole of the media pretend for about 6 to 8 weeks, maybe 12 weeks, that the whole thing is a scandal about somebody kidnapping the incumbents on that plane. It's just a false news story. And the people in America who are not prepared to reveal the religious fraud and have a pastor in their chat room, none of them do the honest thing and reveal that this is a revelation to cover up Greg Hallett's truthful and insightful life and the exposes he made on the royals. But what they do is they make false news about it and they trivialise it. They've not let me come on their programme to talk about any of the massive financial frauds or any of the nuclear scandals that we are fully aware of. Right then, let's just finish it off and then we can scan down that list. We've got the Everetts again and the Hills. Now Lewis Hill was the only person that I'm aware of that was entered in Hansard and then deleted as a British Prime Minister. He was so right wing, he replaced Winston Churchill in 1955. He was only in office for a fortnight, and then the Labour Party were able to bring him down because of his links to fascist Italy. And all of that appears in the news. It's everything. And the Johnson thing is likely to be about the revelations of Lyndon B. Johnson being involved in the Agent Orange campaign in Vietnam and the selling off of America's Federal Bank to the Rothschilds when he signed the official order 1111 within a few hours of John F. Kennedy's killing in America. All of that is explained. All of the things that I explained to Jim Fetzer and made his jaw drop onto the floor and pull out of the interview about Untermeyer and Brandeis and the extension of World War I by 2 brutal years by Woodrow Wilson for his sexual coercion. All of it is a scandal. All of it comes from my living room, and the capacity for me to find the truth from the business registers and the archives and the writings of people like Carrington Hitchcock, who reveals the Rothschilds' input, but when I update it to their modern day registry numbers and their links to people like Henry Kissinger, the world's biggest killer, then they need to silence me using whatever method they can. And when I pass people on the pavements now, there's one from Holland that rides a bike. He's very interested in my website. And he said to me this afternoon, "Oh, you're still walking the pavements. Congratulations." They know that what I'm describing will change the ownership of the world unless they take me out. If they martyr me, it will change the ownership of the world more quickly. Right then. Very few employees, as one has come to expect. Okay, so this is the bit that we keep popping down to. So when you have a list of 6 or 7 people on each of the companies, but they do not list any employees, that's called director only company. And you can see that some of these things are massive scams. So Combined Secretarial Services Limited, look at it, current dissolved, the number of resigned companies that they have crashed is 56,635 of a total of 58949. And this is by Dukes and Duchess. These are old money men and old money duchesses. The criminals now in the financial sector in the City of London and all of the corrupted stock markets that we've talked about in Berlin, in Australia, in China, in Toronto, and all across Canada, and in the City of London in particular. The crimes are massive, and the directors make a huge profit. The employees get treated like shit, and they have no job security in any sector of life now, which is what fascism is very good at. The only thing that you can find in the DSS now is how to get into the army and how to get culled in a uniform. Okay, there's one, Alba Trees. That's the one with the links to the Nazi popes and the lake in Alba and the massive villas that turned out to be park hotels and are inhabited by Archbishop Hudel, who lived very close to Innsbruck and was one of the Nazi launderers in the Odessa file issues, and took all of those people into Latin America so that they could begin to cull poor people again in the genocides that were Operation Condor and the Caravan of Death. The Pope helped give confession to the generals in that conflict, and Pinochet spent his retirement years with Mrs. Thatcher in London. Okay, I think we can stop now. Let's have a quick look at what's on this list. I'm just going to put the camera down and see if I can make this a little bit wider. Okay, so we've seen the man in Bedford, Damien Torquil, in the City of London. There's a Robertson who traces to Barra. Now Barra is in the Western Isles, and it's relatively innocent, but there are massive fish companies there. It's a relatively sleepy little place, Talisker Bay International Limited. Yeah, they've got distilleries out there on the west coast and the islands. And when we were on Isla, there was a conspiracy theory that one of the distilleries was actually a weapons plant, and all sorts of things go on. We've mentioned the Yukon thing, which is a link to the west coast and the Burns Club territory, but it is actually about the explorer called Thompson, who came from that region, going into Kenya and sub-Saharan Africa and taking it into the Commonwealth, and then, like Mungo Park, who was the originator of the exploration program down there, and the originator also of the massive park hotels that we have frequented as well-funded customers since I became a professor in the university sector. But since my wife became aware of my evil behaviours in revealing these massive crimes, we can't afford to go to the Park Hotel anymore. We've talked about the Hydro at Selkirk, which I believe was run, or was claimed to be run, by the Steele children, and we've talked about that being named after Yukon. I've cleared the name of Stephen Pringle already, But let's have a wee look at where he operates from, the other Stephen Pringle, assuming that this is not my school chum. Michael McGrath. It's amazing. I've worked a lot in the Selkirk region. I've worked on the Buccleuch estate, and it's quite amazing how rural and rustic the directorships and the registrations are. So this one must be for Yukon Hydroelectric Company. So there's the declaration that they don't trade out of Burns country away out west, but they're actually in Buccleuch, Weatherhouse, Bowhill, Selkirk, TD7 7ES. Have a wee look at the directors. Alan George Greenshields, George Wilson Greenshields, Mark Coombs, Stephen Pringle and Michael James McGrath. 41, 9 resigned, 50 in total. Michael McGrath. Now what am I trying to highlight here? Now this is a sleepy region in the backwoods of Selkirk, where one of Scotland's heroes, William Wallace, was in the Ettrick Forest for a time as, you know, someone who was fighting, I forget what they call it when you hide in the forest rather than come out and engage in open battle, guerrilla warfare. So when you look at what this man's got at the bank in the Ettrick Forest region, 2 Weatherhouse cottages, Bowhill, 15 appointments at 15 active companies, 9 resigned appointments, born 1958, at the bank, total current assets value of 60 million. That's a wee cottage near Bowhill, where the Dukes of Buccleuch don't actually live in the massive mansion because they've got so many other massive mansions elsewhere which they prefer. It's a tourist icon. It's a blessedly productive tourist outlet, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when you see how much these folk have got at the bank in each of their massive initiatives, and when you see how the Duchess is in a position to crash their pension funds, then you feel slightly sorry for them. And the fact that they don't understand what happened at Flodden, but they're still enslaved in this feudal system, is pathetic and quite tragic. Scottish Enterprise Borders. Now this is a shocker, because they're in Gleski. And I've explained that on Facebook by explaining and listing all of the names on this. They're in Gleski for shame, one would imagine, because what they're doing is they're registering themselves as directors. Goodness knows how much they get remunerated, but there's the listing of directors, and every one of those directors could be getting a take of 50 to 60,000 pounds, maybe even 100,000 pounds. I've got no way of knowing because I'm not prepared to pay for the corporate documents that declare that. Okay, but there's the registered address. This is the Scottish Enterprise Borders in my region, registered at floor 4, 50 Waterloo Street, Glasgow. And I've mentioned the strong affiliation to Rule Britannia and Thomson in the Scottish Borders, and how Thomson's monument is adored by Scots who are not interested in freedom for their country or sovereignty even for their regional government. All they are interested in is their feudal role as serfs to the king and the crown templar, and ever so loyal to all of the dukes and duchesses, even the ones who are prepared to crash the pension funds and to have the massive wealth divide in places like Dalkeith. Right, now the list of names here is quite spooky, because some of them are related to people that sort of came up to me. When I came back, I was public enemy number 1. I was portrayed as a profiteer in pharma, and I got lectures from people like a Mr. Davidson, who's a former pharmacist and an ethicist. He's on the ethics committee at the Borders General Hospital. That's Councillor Veronica Mary Davidson on the board, registered in Glasgow. That's Councillor Alistair Henry Hutton. He's the one that runs the military tattoo in Las Vegas, and his company, which is named specifically so that it looks like a Scottish Rugby Union initiative, SRUC, is actually got 90 million at the bank. He pleads for donations for the Indian missions, where they pick characters like Malala to come out of the ghettos there, like Annie Lennox does in Malawi. And it is horrible what he is doing. He's the director at the Royal British Legion in Kelso. He gives the sermon encouraging the ultimate sacrifice, both for Jesus Christ and for troops that serve for their country. His chest is covered in medals, and he gives the sermon. And the other guy that gives the sermon, who denies the existence of John Robertson Wright, which was the reason that Peter Wright, the rugby consultant, was pulled into the Selkirk coaching job, he denies that that person exists, but demonises Islam. You heard some of this already in the previous interviews. Alexander Douglas Niven, expert on agriculture. Very difficult to understand what he says because his accent is strongly Irish. I never get invited to participate in media events in the Borders. I've told you about the woman that runs the local paper. She's received all my emails on all the global frauds, the crashing of the banks, the involvement of Michael Moore. None of it gets published. But when I get drunk on the day that my divorce writ appears, it's openly declared that I swear at women and I call them obese. And all of those people are in the courts every time I tell them about John Anthony Chilcot, Malcolm Rifkind, their overlapping directorships and the arms crimes in the Arms to Iraq scandal, and the cover-up of the subsequent inquest, which was chaired by John Anthony Chilcot. It is scandalous. They just process the poor, they persecute the innocents and the insightful, and they continue to steal from the people. Mr. John Andrew Thatcher, Mr. Andrew John Thatcher, Mr. David Mackenzie Hill, Mr. David Parker, whoops, a former head of the Borders Council, Mr. Gareth Thomas Gilroy Baird. Now, when the Freemasons executed people returning from the Napoleonic Wars in the anti-communist cull, there was a Baird killed. There was a Lees on the list, but because the Lees was from the south, they let him off without putting the noose round his neck. That's returning troops fighting a revolution against the elites. When they come home, they get culled because they have the capacity to confront corrupted leaders, and they've come together in regiments that have risked their life for their country but do not inhabit boardrooms stealing from their citizens like these bastards. Mr. David Pringle Douglas, Mr. Hugh Westerby Tasker, pharmacist like the moralist, Mr. James Robert Hume. You've heard my videos on the Hume Bridge and my unfriending on Facebook by Jim Hume MSP, whose Facebook page is covered in hippos, aka horses. He understands intimately the philosophical joke that the philosopher Hume, I don't know whether they're related, but Hume was allegedly deeply moral and used to write about the philosophy of warfare. They sparked World War I on the Hume Bridge in Sarajevo. That has been written out of world history since I disclosed it and Jim Hume, who came and shook my hand in Kelso because he knew that I was getting active and I was up there in the top 5% of LinkedIn users with President Obama. They want the cheap shot publicity, but they do not want the accountability that they need to have as civic leaders. That, of course, may not be the Jim Hume who has deserted me as an activist and a freedom fighter, because of the family implications and because of all of the corruption that the Lib Dems take the fall for in place of the more corrupted Conservative Party. And I believe that the Conservative Party and Cameron are much more decent by a country mile than the new Labour that brutalised Iraq in the name of democracy so that Tony Blair could become the envoy to the Middle East. Oh, look, that's the man that David Curry denied existence of. He's got a lot of companies, he's got massive holdings, he's got loads of dosh at the bank. He lives in Ednam. If you read the Old Testament, that is Edom. It is vicious. This is the Old Testament that is read in the Church of Scotland, where they demonise Islam, but they've got trillionaires in the worshipping community. And because they're friends of the people that demonise Islam, those people deny that they exist. Others in the community who are more decent but down the financial services food chain and don't run care homes for profit, they tell you that, yeah, John Robertson Wright lives in that house there. I don't know what he looks like, because none of them like to accept publicity because they're fraudsters or they're multi-millionaires and their neighbours' kids are impoverished. Mr. Kenneth James Clark. That couldn't be Ken Clark that condones rape under certain circumstances, because he's too far to the south. Michael Drummond Clark, the Drummonds again that have got the gagging order on me at Jedburgh Sheriff Court. Jarman Van Kirk. Oh, a Douglas, might be the Black Douglases. Youngers. Professor Christopher Edward Ralph Maddox. Professor David Gareth Owen. Don't know whether he got professors at the Borders College, but if they have, they're registered as a charity in Dubai with Michael Moore's massive shipping companies. The whole thing is twisted. Mr. John Crawford. Okay, this is Hutton. Let's have a look at his holdings. This is the one with the medals on the chest, runs the British Legion, gives the sermon on Remembrance Sunday because the vicar's in the ITU. And what have we got? Let's just run through his companies. The Crime Concerns Scotland Trust, law enforcement. Yeah, so this is a man with medals all across his chest that adores people that will go to distant lands to kill people, gives the sermon in the church, and is a director on a company that makes money out of auditing the efficiency of detecting crime in Scotland. The bastards have completely ignored all of my unremunerated research for 4 years that could fill the treasury, that could make education all over Britain free again, but they choose to tuck it away in their non-executive directorships. They're not even obligated to declare it anymore, and when you work in the Borders but register it in Glasgow, it's all a little bit under the table. Calchew Electronics Limited. Don't know what that is. In receivership. Impact Weather Services Limited, European Editions Limited, Sustainability Today Limited, Edinburgh Lothian and Scottish Borders Screen Industries Office Limited. Now the Church of Scotland has televisuals. They've got, it's a brilliant atmosphere there. When they read the sermons and they say something a bit heretical, the roof tiles shake and the TV screen flickers. It's almost as if God is trying to give one a message And when the sun comes pouring out onto the speaker because they make some innocent or decent concept, then you can see that the worshippers might understand that God is real, but that the messianic figurehead that is Jesus Christ is a fake. All of the hymns that include Jesus Christ are just ritually sung. They clap their hands, they dance around without any vague understanding or capacity to interpret what they're doing and why they're doing it. But they're all decent, and they all shake me by the hand, and they all realise the power of honesty, and they still talk to me even although I declare that they demonised Islam on the weekend. Edinburgh Lothian and Scottish Border Screen Industries Disease Prevention Organisation. Now, if they were to shut down the Malawi Beg project run by the Church of Scotland in Kalimpong in India, then we might get some sort of downturn in the statistics on pathology in those countries. And when the Ebola thing becomes an epidemic, then very quickly charitable leaders like this take it on and they make money from it. The Crime Concern Trust Limited had a second go at that, but that was way back in 1991 and 94. Future of Kelso. This is all the local politicians, all of them listed as directors, and they include the Labour politicians who have become Conservative politicians. I'm not allowed to talk to any of them because they're my political representatives, and I can explain to them why they have no funds. They don't want to hear it. They want to take their orders from the tyrants that are the monarchies and the moneylenders, so that society can be twisted and dismembered. Scottish Enterprise Borders. See interlikes to write, Jim Hume, McCall and McKee. Now those are names in the solicitor sector. I've just mentioned Jim Hume and explained who he is. McCall is tied into the solicitors company that engaged me, then gave me the fees back, because McCall is involved in financial scams with Prime Ministers like Douglas Home and JP Morgan and George Soros, and that takes you into Michael Moore and the Parliamentary Foundation for Democracy Limited. McKee's a young lawyer, and it may not be the same person. He said he would take me on, but when his colleagues in more senior positions learned that I'd made an approach, that very quickly became a set of negative responses, and he had to take a holiday when I was looking for representation. SEC Corporate Trustee Limited, Institute of Contemporary Scotland, Institute of Contemporary Scotland. Oh, Ali Hutton, Company Secretary and Director, the 1st of the 4th 2001 to the 9th of the 10th 2002. Oh, it's not such a thin blue line, but he's worked as Secretary and Director on that institute. There's the SRUC, £90 million at the bank for that one. I haven't looked at the others, but this is the man that raises money. They run the food bank. Nobody can tell you how you access the food bank. I'm now buying Lord Sainsbury's products, all of them. I've now nearly got the whole collection of the basics product from Lord Sainsbury, who was the Science Minister when I worked as a professor in the UK in 2004, and has now sold Sainsbury's into the Lloyds Banking Group toxic debt. Sainsbury has since round about 2002 bailed out of the company that is Sainsbury's, and it's now in Lloyd's toxic debt pool. The whole economy is busted by design. Everybody is paying interest to the money lenders that the fictitious Jesus warned us about. Let's go to the bottom of the list. CSV, Stable Life. Now that could be another joke at the horse connection and the race course community, which with the golf courses across the country and across the world are able to enslave the people get the Freemasons tied in, and the people that surveilled me before we went to New Zealand, from the family of the treasurer at the Scottish Borders Council who visited me in New Zealand, they sat in the golf club and watched us celebrate with our family and my uncle, who's a Freemason, and plays golf and drinks with people at the lodge, goes fishing, plays golf with them, and the day after we left for New Zealand, after his family members and his in-laws had sat on the bar stools and made it plain that they were watching me because of my reputation as a capitalist with the pharmaceutical industry, and the councillor, who was a Labour councillor's brother, watched me all of the time since we came back from New Zealand. Every time we went to a restaurant, they were there, monitoring what we were doing, who we were with. It's pathetic. My home is monitored with televisual and auditory apparatus. I'm now very grateful to them all because that keeps me safe. If I get martyred, then you know all about the people who are most likely to want that to happen, and Hutton is one of them. You can find his transcript on Wikipedia, which quite surprised me for a local politician. Very unusual to get local politicians with a profile like that, but that may be his presence on the board of the company that runs the military tattoo in Las Vegas. £90 million in the debating sector. Now we must have the corporate documents for that, so let's have a wee look. Not sure. SRUC is a debating society and a public speaking event. Now Tony Blair gets £10,000 an hour for public speaking, and I don't know how much this guy gets for it, but you've got there a list of his directors, and you've got here the trading address and the corporate details for it. There we go. So there is, it's 27 years old. It's based in Peter Wilson Buildings, King's Buildings, West Mains Road. Now I've been chased from there. It used to be the civil servant buildings as you go down towards the grass market, and I don't know what happens in it now. So in my inquisitive way, I went into the antechamber, you know, I went into the reception desk, and they bummed me out. And I now understand why they bummed me out, because they know that I'm curious, they know I'm intelligent, and what you've got is a declaration that they've got cash 7 million, net worth 94 million pounds. This is a debating society run by the man that gives the sermon in the Church of Scotland, runs the British Legion, adores the ultimate sacrifice, adores the Rule Britannia theme and the foundation of that, and the monument to it, which is right opposite his house. And he's a friend in the same scheme of the doctor that tried to get me sectioned and trained as a policeman first. It's ruthless. I will not relent until there is some sort of justice for children in the UK that are the victims of this greed and hypocrisy. There's the one in Kelso that takes in the dental character, but I don't think that that will be the dental character. There's the ice rinks. It's very interesting to see that the decent people that came and chatted to me from the ice rink wanted me to understand the director that was in the solicitor firm that handled our acquisition of this lovely house. It's one of the nicest ones I've ever owned. That person is on the boards of companies, and when I've made interviews explaining that I bought the coffee for him and that he thinks there is no fraud but it's just an accident or a cock-up, then I'm very grateful to those girls, and I will go and maybe have a go at curling just so I can talk to some decent people again. That's all it needs to happen to get society back to capability and to being well enough funded to support our children. Margaret Robertson. Now that spooked me, because that's a family friend. When I was born,